today is Katie Martell. She is widely known as an unapologetic truth teller, which I love, and she is very true to. Katie's pointed out that 2020 caught many marketing teams unprepared for the collision between social movements and marketing. And the fact is that today's reality is that consumers and B2B buyers alike are increasingly looking to align with brands that have the same values. Well, fortunately, Katie's here to tell us the new rules of engagement for brands and marketers. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you for having me. For those of you that don't know, I'm a huge fan of Ginger, and I have been for a decade now. How long have we known each other? At least 2009, at least.
Definitely.
Oh, it's so fun to be here. Thank you for letting me. I'm going to share my screen while I vamp a little bit. Hold on. Can you all see my messy desktop and now my slides?
Yes.
Oh, technologically, we were so close in the sound, but we nailed it on the slides. Thank you all for joining on this Wednesday evening. I'm coming to you live from Newton, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. And I love New York and I miss it dearly. And I hope you all are safe and happy there. Ginger, thank you for having me. Right before this, and the reason that I was very rudely late is I was actually talking to a major, large, enormous tech company whose name I wish I could share on this exact topic. So I'm coming right off that topic where it was an internal conversation about this navigating uncertainty. And Ginger, I have to disagree with you. I am not writing a book and documentary on the rules. There are no rules. And that is why we are here, is we are all stumbling through a very strange time to be in marketing. So that's my disclaimer to get me out of any trouble today. But what I've been doing over the last few years with this great nickname of unapologetic marketing truth teller is I have been looking at the world of social movements and marketing and the way that they are colliding. My background is not in consumer advertising. My background is in B2B marketing and data services and marketing technology. And I have worked in-house as well as agency side for a number of B2B brands, including co-founding my own marketing technology startup back in 2014. For the last 4 years, I've been serving as an independent consultant speaker, which has given me a chance to kind of just go rogue and say how I feel about the industry. That has earned me this nickname. That is why I'm in front of you today. But I would love this to be an interactive conversation. So if you do have questions or anything, I would love to hear your perspective. What I have to talk about is my own experience looking at a pretty complex subject, also a very uncomfortable subject in many places. And we only learn by getting real with each other, marketer to marketer, and by having a conversation together about moving forward. What I'm doing is I am working on a book and a documentary called Pandemonium, and it explores the pandering that a lot of brands do, sometimes unintentionally, many times intentionally, towards social movements. The collision, like I mentioned, is often not a pretty one. In some cases, it really is a great opportunity for all of our brands. What I hope to give you today are a series of things and guardrails to think about as you're deciding how your firm now navigates a world that truly is the most difficult yet exciting time to be in marketing. Because I'm a truth teller, I have a number of truths for you. So this is truth number one. This is a weird time to be in marketing. I mean, in the first case, I don't care what industry you're in, if you sell toilet paper or you sell ERP solutions, there is more competitors than ever, more competition, and the need to differentiate is stronger than ever. So we're also dealing with this mistrust situation where, you know, in many industries, being the most trusted brand is the only competitive differentiation. We have a decline in trust in every major cultural institution. Government, media, business is not immune from that. So consumers are starting to be inherently skeptical whenever we come to the table with any kind of marketing. In the middle of all of this is this rise of needing to align with buyers on shared values. Buyers are increasingly choosing to work with companies that reflect their beliefs well outside of what the products or services that they offer are. It doesn't have to be like what politician you support, but beliefs about the role of your industry in society, beliefs about the future of work, beliefs about the industry in which you operate, but increasingly beliefs that are about societal issues. A study from Edelman found that consumers expect brands to act. They actually will choose, they'll switch, they'll avoid, they'll even go so far as to boycott brands based on where they stand on societal issues. This is the era of brand democracy, where consumers overwhelmingly say that they believe brands now occupy a different space in the world than ever before. They believe brands can be a powerful force for change. They expect brands to represent them and to solve societal problems. And the way that they hold us accountable is through their wallet, voting with your wallet, right? So this means you and I are here. We are stuck between the age of mistrust and this idea of corporate purpose. And as marketers, man, it is not easy to navigate this. This is a new set of expectations. Not only are we expected to do this, we're still expected to drive revenue, manage digital transformation, attract talent, manage our teams, right? Oh, and deal with the global pandemic, right? I have no lack of empathy for what a marketer is dealing with right now. And I love meme culture. So I have a couple memes in this deck, but this is one that one consumer made, where companies are trying to decide how to market their brands in June of 2020, where you have three major zeitgeists, right, that are coming all in at the same time. One is Pride Month, one is, of course, the global pandemic, and one, of course, is the Black Lives Matter protests that are rocking the nation. So the question is now, what zeitgeist do you tap into this month? And what happens when there's three going on at the same time? The thing about, this issue, and I'm just going to close these blinds because my Boston afternoon sunshine is getting in my eyes here. The issue here that I want to really address is as it relates to Black Lives Matter and as it relates to the recent protests, right? We have social movements and marketing throughout the year. You see in March, you have International Women's Day. And I have spoken in the past with events that Ginger has thrown about femvertising and aligning your brand with feminism and using those themes in your marketing. There's also rainbow washing, like I mentioned with Pride Month. We have greenwashing as it relates to using sustainability in our marketing. But the world of Black Lives Matter, for me, this movement is very serious. And I found myself really hesitant to even comment on this. I have a lot to say, if you haven't noticed, about the world of marketing. And when I saw this, when I saw all of the rush statements, the letters from our CEO and the stark white font on black background social posts, my first instinct was actually indignation. I was very cautious to even comment on what was happening. I just watched as one statement after another hit. And some of you on the call might have been behind some of these statements, and that's okay. But I thought to myself, how dare marketers enter such serious territory with impunity? This is a movement that was created because Black people are dying. Not because Black lives matter more than others, but because they are treated as if they do not matter to begin with. This is a movement to stop a very real threat of white supremacy and to end violence inflicted upon Black communities. It builds upon decades of struggles for equality that can often feel like deja vu, right? As we slip right back into complacency until the next Say Their Name campaign comes out. It's a critical movement. And so we see this stand as a representation of how corporations understand their role in the Black Lives Matter movement, these statements. Somebody wisely but cringe-worthily made a mockery of our statements. Have you all seen this? We at Brand are committed to fighting injustice, yada, yada, yada. The last line is my favorite. We hope this action encourages you to view us positively without, expecting anything from us. So I'm just gonna open the chat so I can see everyone's here. Okay, so I now see the chat, so if anyone is, can you all see my slides advancing? I hope so, because I'm gonna keep going.
Some of us can, some of us can't, but the DMCNY folks are looking into taking care of that right now.
All right, cool. All right, I'll keep going then. And so what we're now dealing with is, I believe, spring and summers of 2020's hottest look, corporate performative allyship. And I think we're going to look back at this moment as a time when this global movement around Black Lives Matter is co-opted by corporate performative allyship. In the rest of this deck, I'm going to define what I mean by this. I'm going to show you examples of the good, the bad, the ugly, and I'm hoping to give us some guidelines as we think about the impact of our actions in response to this movement. Corporate performative allyship and performative allyship as a whole, this can apply to individuals too. It's an empty promise, right? So when you issue words that are pretty vague, right, like condemn, or stand with without real meaningful action. Someone once called it homogeneous wallpaper because it all starts to look the same, right? Title slide only. Oh, that's so weird. I'm just gonna actually real quick stop my share and I'm gonna redo it. Hold on, people. You know, sometimes it happens. Okay. I'm hoping that's better, and if not, I'm ignoring the chat and I'm gonna keep going. Cool, Ginger?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so, oh, is Ruth Stevens on the call? Hi, Ruth Stevens. I just have to give a shout out to Ruth. I'm a big fan. Okay, so performative allyship is an empty promise, right? So it's these vague words. It's also opportunistic. The timing of when we issue these statements is highly suspect. If we're supporting the cause while it's trending, often without a history of demonstrated support before the movement, this is opportunistic. And the final and most important part of what performative allyship is passing the blame. And many statements are just that, statements, platitudes. They take no stand to include Black Lives Matter or the term anti-racism, which is really what the movement calls for. Essentially, a lot of these statements ended up trivializing the matter. Many didn't even use the word Black, right? So we're really looking at a situation where performative allyship and passing of the blame is kind of, I think, an unrecognized danger. Holiday Phillips, who is a former tech employee at Apple and Monzo, she's now an activist and a teacher. She has a great article that I will link to, and it really defines performative allyship as this, the idea of passing the blame. It refuses to acknowledge personal responsibility for the systemic issues that provide the context for the relevant tragedy. Performative allyship is when you look at a villain out there and you blame a scapegoat rather than looking internally. It separates you, the good, from them, the bad. You might blame the cop, you might blame Republican, I don't care who you blame, but finding a scapegoat is really avoiding and passing the blame. And of course, consumers can see it. And so we have memes like this sense of meaningless pandering that consumers will call brands out for. How you doing, fellow minorities? It is I, your friendly neighborhood corporation, here again to support you in your socially accepted movement, right? They mock us because we fail to take the movement seriously. In many cases, we deserve to be mocked, right? Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. The Metropolitan Opera posted, "There is no place for racism in the arts. There is no place for racism in New York City." William Otto on Twitter was quick to point out that the Met has never performed the work of a Black composer. The NFL, who of course blacklisted Colin Kaepernick for kneeling in protest of police brutality, issued a statement that they are saddened by the tragic events across our country. Like, you want to read it, right, with that like really sad voice. Ava DuVernay, the director and filmmaker, was very quick to call them out. Shame on you. This is hollow and disingenuous. This is a lie. Your actions show who you are. You've done nothing but the exact opposite of what you describe here. Martell Bennett, who was a patriot for a short amount of time, I'm in Boston, said that none of them, meaning white quarterbacks, spoke up when it wasn't easy to speak up. Now they're writing statements. I also love that he says, telling me there's no racism in the league is like sitting on an elephant and telling me it's a horse. I think he's hilarious on Twitter. You know, but what happened here is that the NFL was quickly called out for performative allyship, and they changed their statement. So the Forbes article you see on screen represents the league's evolving take and stance on the matter. We were wrong not to listen to Black protests. Another company that was called out very quickly for performative allyship, but then shifted to fix the matter, hopefully, was L'Oreal Paris, who in 2017 had hired and then fired a transgender model, Monroe Bergdorf, and fired her because she was speaking out at that time, more sunshine, speaking out at that time about racism, criticizing white supremacy and white privilege. And they fired her because of her provocative statements on social. Then when these protests, which by the way, have the highest acceptance rate now than they ever have before, so it's really safe to have a stance, she spoke out right away with L'Oreal, who posted, "Speaking out is worth it." She said, you know, in 2017, you didn't feel the same way. Days after doing this, L'Oreal, which by the way had a new president, actually hired Monroe as a consultant on its UK Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board. So the new leadership team recognized that, you know, how the situation was handled in the past wasn't ideal. The organization is also donating in a number of actions. But it shows that consumers and influencers like this will keep receipts, right? And they keep receipts of the past behavior. And it really opens the door to risk and being called out for a history of bad behavior without acknowledging that ownership, without acknowledging that you're passing the blame. I want to highlight a quote that I saw in one of the articles about this topic, which there are many, where Monroe says, "I believe in accountability, but also progress," right? Not cancellation and grudges. What's happening here is cancel culture. These are brands getting called out in real time because of the advent of social media. It is the age of sunlight. It is the age of accountability. Look at the Me Too movement. One story after another, meaning and creating a groundswell of change. But cancel culture seeks to highlight problems. We also need room for evolution and progress. And that's what Monroe says here in regards to L'Oreal, who quickly made steps to remedy a bad decision from the past, or a decision that was just not jamming and aligning with their current statements about the Black Lives Matter movement. Another well-loved or hated, depending on who you are, marketing truth teller in this space, Mark Ritson in Marketing Week posted a scathing article that basically just put up every corporate statement, like this one from L'Oréal Paris, against a picture screenshot of their boards. And it showed all white boards against all Black Lives Matter statements. Here is Nike's. Here is Spotify's, who again also had solidarity Black Lives Matter playlists. And here is Adidas, where Mark says, and I have to quote him, it's too funny not to, "It's an executive board that looks like it has just come in from a fun day of golf at an exclusive Scandinavian country club." So Mark is really dragging Adidas for having put out a statement about Black Lives Matter, but ignoring the makeup of its own executive board. In other words, ignoring their own responsibility in the problem. Mark says, in his pithy way, companies need to become the change they are tweeting about. Walk the walk before you tweet the tweet. So in summary of this section, performative allyship is an empty promise. It is opportunistic, and most importantly, it passes the blame. Now, I really hate the word should. This is my fourth truth for all of you. It should doesn't change people's behavior, right? I don't believe that you change people by shaming them. I'm a marketer. I know how to change behavior. It's what we do every day. And I also believe wholeheartedly that we are all adults in the room. I assume, Ginger, I don't know who's on your mailing list, but I'm assuming we are all adults and responsible and smart enough to think about things critically from many sides of an issue. And so I'm not here to sit here and preach to you and say you should do things differently. And really, anyone who does that isn't invested in long-term solutions. It takes empathy on both sides of an issue to move the issue forward. That's the same tenet that grassroots campaigning has. It's not how do I fight against you so that you change? It's what do we have in common so that we can move forward together? And so I am someone who's, again, I'm not gonna preach. I have no skin in your game. I have none of your goals to hit. And I also don't have any of the answers. What if I just ended the presentation here and was like, okay, see ya. What I do have is a set of dangers. I have done a lot of thinking, writing, speaking, both publicly and privately, like that big tech company I just got off the phone with, about how marketers are navigating this space. We really don't have a rule book for this time. And so it's up to us, and that's not a bad thing, by the way. That means it's an opportunity for us to define what we do right now. Is it better for brands to say nothing? Maybe. I have talked a lot and thought a lot about what the impact is of these performative brand statements. Do these platitudes enable performative wokeness as a substitute for meaningful participation? Maybe. I believe what I have come to terms with and what I can agree on is that there are real consequences to performative allyship. And so I do not want to preach to you. I want to at least educate you of my perspective on 7 ways I think we actually harm the movements that we seek to align ourselves with. And again, if you agree with me, let me know in this chat. If you have questions, let me know. And if you disagree with me, please turn on your video and let's talk, because I have yet to find a team that's really anti what I'm having to say, and I want to find that because I know that I'm not 100% right. So the first thing that performative allyship does is really important. It redefines the work, right? It redefines what it means to be an ally down to #activism. This idea that the racial bias that drives a lot of the injustices that we see and that the majority of Americans now care about somehow doesn't exist within our own corporations. Personally, I think this is an opportunity for brands to lead with actions, not just words. Every business creates economic opportunity. Every business can choose to be part of the solution. My friend Liz Simpson, who, by the way, I'm just going to throw her up on screen, she is an excellent sales consultant, and she works a lot with women to help them achieve economic empowerment, which she sees as a great equalizer. And I agree with her. So look up Liz if you're looking for a sales trainer. And what this and how this translates is taking the easy way out versus doing the real work. The real work is things like donations, right? And a lot of companies are doing that, but also actions, not just these solidarity, we are with you statements. Rather than treat Black Lives Matter, or any social movement for that matter, as a one-time newsjacking stunt to be part of that global conversation, well, the real work, what the movement is asking for, are sustainable commitments, long-term initiatives. This is not about external messaging. If this is considered a PR problem, then you are part of the problem, not the solution. What this movement calls for is internal education, internal policy. And if your messaging focuses on the woes of society, you're ignoring the fact that you have a role to play in the solution. What the movement calls for is transparency and diversity, even going so far as to publish your diversity stats so that you have a benchmark to then improve from. That would go a long way in quantifying the solution. It means hiring, promoting more Black executives, closing the wage gap too, which I think is huge. Black women make 61% of what their white male colleagues make. That means they have to work 7 extra months to earn the same pay as a male coworker on average. And finally, and this one is broad on purpose. And again, the canvas is blank. This is about making use of your time, your space, your budget, and your influence. It's broad because it's really up to you. For example, Ginger, could you ensure that speaker lineups are not mostly white men as predominant in the tech sector? That is something within, I'm not calling Ginger out. Ginger does a great job, did not mean to call you out. But that is something within your sphere of influence that will create lasting change. I was just talking to, like I mentioned, this tech company, and I had helped them a while ago on securing speakers for an event. And we had come up with a list of people that had a lot of followers and a ton, great brand name recognition. And admittedly, we had come up with an all white list. And so we had to do that really awkward conversation where it's like, guys, we got to go find some Black women. How awkward is that of a moment to say? But if you don't say that, if you don't go through that moment of white fragility guilt and have that conversation, nothing's going to change. And we found a fantastic group of speakers who helped us diversify the lineup because we were able to be proactive. And what I saw at the conference made all that awkwardness worth it. I'm there on site, the speaker had finished, one of the speakers we had booked on this token list, unfortunately, but that's the case. And she finished speaking, she gets off stage, and she was mobbed. There was a line down the hallway of young Black women who were lining up to talk to her. I had never seen anything like that. And I realized in that moment how important it was to just give people an opportunity to see themselves on stage. I know it's a small act, it wasn't a huge deal, but I know that I affected the way that those women of color saw themselves by seeing someone that they respect and admire who looks like them on stage. Okay, I'm gonna stop playing white savior for a minute here. I wanna give you an example of a company who did a great job in not being performative allies and really owned their role in the solution. If anyone here is a fan of Rent the Runway, Ginger, have you heard of this? It's you get to rent, brand name clothes, which is a lot cheaper than buying designer clothing. She is the CEO. This is Jennifer Hyman. This is the CEO and the co-founder. And right away, and you can go to her LinkedIn profile, you can find this, Jennifer Hyman. She posted one of those kind of like statements from our CEO. And I'll be honest, I read through a lot of these and I really wasn't expecting a whole lot. Shame on me, because she blew me away. The first thing they did in the statement, and she did, is acknowledge that the industry of fashion, and to quote her, has co-opted the style, the inspiration, and the ideas of Black culture without ensuring Black people are economically compensated for it. She acknowledged it right away, and then she took responsibility. She goes, the fashion industry must do better, and we at Rent the Runway are responsible for being part of this change. She then took a stand by saying, we believe that supporting Black business, Black designers, and Black talent is both in the fashion industry's moral and financial best interest. That last line is key because you need to, money talks. You have to make these moves speak volumes. But here's the actions that she committed to. It wasn't just a donation. It wasn't just a lip service statement. She said, we are going to allocate $1 million for Black designers through our wholesale platform and co-manufacturing initiatives. What that is going to translate to is providing design resources, data mentorship, and financial support so that Black designers can actually create collections for Rent the Runway. And this is important because for me, the idea of access is really where systemic privilege and systemic racism comes into play. In this case, Black designers typically don't have the investment capital to launch on their own. And instead of ignoring that awkward truth, they're addressing it. They're proactively, specifically allowing them the help and support to have capital to launch these brands. The other thing she's doing, is anyone familiar with the 15% pledge? This was a movement started by Aurora James, where it's a push for retailers across the country to commit to buying 15% of their merchandise from Black-owned businesses. The tagline of this movement is, we represent about 15% of the population. We should represent 15% of your shelf space. Can you imagine if every retailer that you went to had 15% of their products sourced by Black entrepreneurs and Black-owned businesses? Economic empowerment is a great equalizer. So Sephora had signed on to that pledge already, and I'm sure other brands have since I last checked. It's happening in real time, people. But Rent the Runway also committed to at least 15% of the fashion talent that they feature and support moving forward will be from the Black community. This includes models in marketing, ambassadors that they use, styling talent, photographers, videographers, even the crews behind the camera. That's going to change the way that these Black individuals navigate the world. It's going to give them opportunities that the systemic racism that exists in our world wouldn't have given them. And I think it's a beautiful example of leadership. I like her statement too and her perspective on it. And I think it rings true for any company. In this time of chaos, when our country is reeling from racial injustice and coronavirus, it's the best time to re-examine our values as business leaders and to change how we do business. Most importantly, she says, our customers and our teams are watching. Let's make them proud. I love this perspective. I think change begets change. I think when you are in a time of great turmoil, it's a great time to make changes because, hey, everything around you is changing, right? So embrace that chaos a bit to say, well, what can we do actually to change the status quo that we're used to? I also like Jess Wiener's quote, you cannot PowerPoint your way out of this one. The head of Talk to Jess Consulting, which deals with how brands can navigate the world of women. And I just love her because she says, standing by someone is the bare minimum. Donations help, but she really is encouraging companies to do the work and rinse and repeat. You cannot PowerPoint your way out of this one. I have 6 more dangers of performative allyship, but I promise they'll go a bit faster. That first one is the most important. The second thing I think this tends to do is just simply exploit what is a very serious human rights movement for corporate gain. When we are performatively allying ourselves and our businesses to a movement, we are doing it for ourselves. The movement does not benefit, the brand does. That is the definition of co-opting and exploitation. It actively works to harm the movement. The third thing it does is it creates an illusion of progress. This is what marketing does, right? Like we create perception and perception is reality. What consumer has time to go and research the actions and the stances and the supply chain of every brand they buy from, right? None. We use marketing as a gut check to say what a brand is about and whether or not they can be trusted. And so when our statements don't align to reality, it creates this false illusion that the world of business is far more equitable than it truly is. And it hides the real scope of the problem. Problems that we cannot solve if we don't see it and understand it clearly. I'll give you an example of how this plays out in the workplace. This is a study from Boston Consulting Group. Half of all diverse employees in the study stated that they see bias as a large part of their day-to-day work experience. Half also said that they do not believe their companies have the mechanisms in place to ensure major decisions like who gets a promotion, who gets a stretch assignment, are free from bias. By contrast, white heterosexual males who tend to dominate the leadership ranks, so the majority group, were much more likely to say that the day-to-day experience and major decisions are entirely free of bias. And again, it's just the obvious conclusion that people operate and see when they move through the world, they experience it differently. But it's one thing, it's amazing to put data to it and prove that we cannot solve problems that we cannot see and understand clearly. So this is in the Harvard Business Review of 2019, February 2019 edition. The truth of working while Black is still very, very ugly. In the boardroom, we still have low representation Among director level titles in the Fortune 100, we still have very few CEOs and CFOs, laughably small numbers. And 1 in 4 of Fortune 100 companies have all white executive suites. I mean, this is the reality. This is what the movement is calling to change. It's not so much about showing solidarity, it's about fixing some of these issues. The fourth way that performative allyship actually hurts us is it further undermines the trust of already skeptical consumers. When you make a statement to the world, every bit of marketing, you are making a promise. In most cases, it's a promise to deliver, right, on a product or a service experience. In this case, what you're promising is very serious. Consumers are insisting that brands live up to the promises that they are making in terms of their values. And that's what a brand is, after all. It's just one long series of making promises. When you break that promise, that trust is gone. It is so hard to rebuild trust. But even starting at square one, most consumers come into buying decisions with an inherent sense of skepticism. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, trust is at an all-time low. Most adults don't trust a brand until they see real-world proof. A lot of consumers don't know who to trust. And many consumers call our ads and our brands remote, unreachable, abstract, and self-serving. Ouch, I know. I hate these stats too. What we really are seeing with the rise of woke-washed branding and advertising, you see the Gillette commercial that spoke about what a man is. You see the rainbow-washed sandwich. Who knew there was a gay sandwich? And you see all kinds of, the upside-down McDonald's arch was for International Women's Day. Somehow that honored women. I don't quite know how, but what's happening is that consumers are looking at this and thinking, all right, you know what this is? This is marketing ploy. 56% say that too many brands are using societal issues just to sell more of their product, which we are. Like, it's no secret, right? But it's seen as trust washing. In other words, we're actually working against the very dynamics that we need to be fixing. Trust. We need to be seeking authenticity, genuine marketing. What we're doing instead is actually harming every single brand. All right, number 5, what we're also seeing, and this a lot of people are not aware of, is that allyship that's performative actually perpetuates this cycle of hidden agendas through lobbying. Goods Unite Us found that the average consumer funds politicians and PACs 3 times more through everyday purchase decisions rather than through direct political contributions, and most don't even know it. That group seeks to help companies understand where their dollars are going and how it's funneling into politicians, super PACs, and donations. Judd Legume, who runs Popular Information, found that, in this case, 3 examples, although there are many others in his newsletter, Citi, Google, and Amazon are actively in the last election cycle giving money to elected officials who are rated F by the NAACP. And these are the same companies who are also issuing statements like you see on the left. Citibank had a great statement that, we're proud to work for a company that cherishes diversity. Google, we stand in support of racial equality. And Amazon, of course, in solidarity in the fight against systemic racism. Meanwhile, donating to 274 elected officials rated F by the NAACP. When a brand claims to support a cause, right, while donating to politicians who essentially oppose it, customers are unknowingly funding politicians who work against their interest. Judd Legume points out, if you want to understand a corporation's values, ignore its tweets and pay attention to its FEC filings. I don't think consumers have time to go and dig through FEC filings, but investigative reporters do, journalists do. And the more risk that we introduce to our brands by exposure with data like this, the more unnecessary risk we introduce to our marketing campaigns. Number 6 is important. And like I mentioned, the big tech company I was just speaking to is one of the largest and most influential tech brands. And I said to them specifically, you have such a powerful platform. It is enormous. And most activist social groups would do anything for that kind of influence. And what happens when you are performative with that influence is you are drowning out those brands and those activists that are actually making a difference. Performative responses simply add to the noise of a movement, which, by the way, is actively spreading predominantly on social channels. So you're getting in the way of information about the movement spreading. You are actively harming the flow of important information and updates about the movement. Grassroots orgs cannot compete with that reach. They cannot compete with your budget. Many many brands have chosen to use their platform as this like, good job, you know, we did it, we fixed racism. You know, it's a largely self-serving move. Many brands who also chose to pause on their product launches, on their customer events, all that, that was a great move. They didn't want to get in the way. They didn't want to take focus away. That was great intention. But putting out a statement, I think actively helped to have the same idea. Ruth is asking, how does Katie, hi Ruth, advise brands to be authentic? Is it mainly about how consumers might expect them to behave? Yes. Or is it stuff that builds on what they've already done? Yeah, I think, and you'll see kind of, I have a slide on this, but it's really about how you show up in the world and the role you choose to play in the lives of consumers. I mentioned earlier the data that shows that consumers want more from brands. They want their brand to stand for things that are beyond what the brand actually does, you know, the widget that they sell. This is really about values, and values can't be faked. They can be marketed, but when they're exposed as hypocritical, they're not values anymore. It's just a PR stunt. And so authentic and authenticity, which is just such a buzzword these days, just simply at the very core means, are you reflecting the true values that the organization lives? And are you doing it in a way that honors those values throughout the communities that the brand is part of? So not just internally, and not just for shareholders. You heard the phrase stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is this idea that companies can do well by doing good, by addressing all stakeholders in a business, their employees. So in this case, your diversity and inclusion internally, the way that you treat Black employees and the way that you treat every minority in the business, your customer community, your supply chain, the communities in which your business operates. Look at the gentrification that's happened in San Francisco. That is a direct result of the tech industry. Will they own up to that? Will they actively work to give back to that? Probably not. But if they did, it would be a true, authentic way of handling a problem they helped to create. So authenticity is just living the values that you purport to have, period, end of story. Some of those values may not align with everyone, and that's okay. One of my favorite quotes is, the only thing you find in the middle of the road is roadkill. It is too important these days that to take a stand. It doesn't matter what side you're on, truly. It just matters if that side is A, truthful, and B, aligned with the audience that you seek to address and seek to connect with. I hope I answered your question. Okay. One way that, we're on number 6 here, brands drowning out those actually making a difference. I have this golden rule that if you have nothing of value and substance to add to a conversation, in this case, Black Lives Matter, elevate the voices of those who do, right? Use your platform to elevate the voices of those that have real and meaningful contributions to make. One campaign that leveraged celebrities to kind of live this value was called Share the Mic Now. And for a short period of time, it basically allowed Black women to speak from the Instagram accounts of white women. And the intention of the campaign was to magnify Black women and the important work they're doing in order to catalyze the change that comes, and this is quoting from the campaign website, when we truly hear each other's voices. So use the platforms of some to elevate the voices of others. Every brand that has a large following has that opportunity. One brand that you may not have expected to get into this debate, or not even debate, to get into this movement was babynames.com. And if you go to that homepage right now, you see this. Each one of these names was somebody's baby, it says. And it lists Emmett Till all the way down to Breonna Taylor. When I first saw this, I gotta be honest, it struck me to my core. I mean, this was such a moving piece to have seen on the homepage of a baby name website. I still get a little like uncomfortable looking at it. It is so powerful. And it's a simple act. I mean, babynames.com chose the most valuable part in real estate of their website to have and use that platform for good. I'm reading, I'm not familiar with APPL Joe, so I'm gonna leave that. I'm so sorry, I'm not familiar with that case. So I loved this move by Baby Names, and it really opens up an opportunity for all brands to ask, we have a platform, what are we gonna do with it? The last risk, and this is where it's important for us as marketers who wanna do quote unquote the right thing, both for our business as well as the world around us. And if you don't want that, you're probably on the wrong webinar, but it exposes our brand and our team to enormous risk. As it relates to your employees, performative wokeness, again, when you kind of say one thing and live another, it threatens employee retention. Think about it, it creates this culture of mistrust. It also damages future talent acquisition if your brand is called out for being hypocritical or unwelcoming to a diverse group. It threatens that employer brand. That matters. In a war for talent these days, where work is distributed and people can work anywhere, you really need to have a brand for employers and for your future employees that demonstrates those values that they want, right? I also think that there is, everyone is familiar with this Kendall Jenner Pepsi snafu, where Pepsi thought a few years ago that it could solve racism by handing Pepsi to cops given by a white woman. It was just a weird campaign that was just a little tone deaf, but consumers keep receipts. And so this being the age of sunlight, like I mentioned, you will be called out by consumers, and they're increasingly empowered cancel culture. Real-time social media allows for all brands to be dragged these days, and consumers will put you under a microscope, especially in a situation like Black Lives Matter. This is a very serious movement. There's a new study out from ACE Metrics that did research, and I'll link to it in the chat. Actually, I'll do that right now because it's a brand new study that I just saw. Let's see, hold on. I'm going in the chat. This is very exciting. Okay, check that out. That is a new study from ACE Metrics that looks at how consumers are reacting to some of the Black Lives Matter ads that were produced. Nike's ad about "for once, don't do it," and McDonald's "all of us." And you can see what's important here is you can see the different axes of how they're being measured. On one end is empower, on the other one is exploit. So the point I want to make here is that your ads, your marketing, even if you're not a major consumer brand like this, are now being measured on this scale of exploitation. It is a new dimension by which consumers are going to consume your content and your marketing, and we are being measured by different criteria. So I think I've warned enough people here about the dangers of performative brand allyship. It redefines the work down to meaningless hashtag activism. It exploits a real movement. It creates an illusion that the world is more equitable than it really is. It undermines the trust of already skeptical consumers. It perpetuates hidden agendas through lobbying. It drowns out those actually making a difference, and it exposes us to risk. And I know what you're asking, and it is, what is real allyship? I have 3 traits. It is first and foremost not self-directed. I encourage everyone to ask what the movement is asking from you as a company, not what you stand to gain and what kind of statement you should rush to put out so that you look like everyone else. It is performative alignment to the movement if that's the way you're approaching it. Ask first what the movement is asking from you. Seek to understand the movement and its demands. Number 2, show ownership. Address the systems that allow for the issue to occur. If there's a data breach, you don't blame the hacker. You don't blame your IT guy. You blame the security system that was in place and your lack of ability to get the right tech or the right checks and balances in place, whatever it took to prevent a future breach. That is Crisis Communications 101. The same thing is at play here. This is about systemic racism, not individual scapegoats. Also, ownership means actions over ads. Don't put up an ad unless you have a really strong set of actions to back it up. And marketing is always about creating value, right? So it's an opportunity to ask, how do we leverage our platform, our reach, our resources to create value for a community that is begging to be heard and begging to be supported? This is actually a marketing problem, although it's not a PR problem, if you know what I mean. Finally, real allyship is measurable. Set quantifiable goals. Platitudes don't help, but quantifiable targets do, just like you would with sales goals. Sales goals hold you accountable to revenue, and it keeps your sales team performing. If you miss quota, you don't have a job tomorrow. That should be the case for the issues that we're talking about today. This creates accountability through your own transparency. 2 examples of major brands that have done this is Google and Adidas, who both have a now goal of 30% of leadership positions filled with employees from underrepresented groups. And Google even gave a timeline. By 2025. Change is not going to happen overnight, but if you set some goals and you're transparent against that, it goes a long way to build trust. I love this quote from Joan Williams. This is the last quote I'll read to you. Businesses have failed to make progress on diversity, she says, because they've never bothered to pick up the tools that they use to solve any problem they actually care about. If a business had a problem with sales, the response would not be to hire someone to lead the company in deep conversations about how fervently the company cares about sales and put on programming for National Celebrate Sales Month. The business would gather the evidence, metrics, and keep trying different things until it achieved its sales goals. Why should systemic racism be any different, right? So that's what real allyship is. And I just encourage you, as we think about how to move forward together, how will you use your platform, your power, and your privilege to help the movement? If you are an internal marketer dealing with directives from the E team saying, go ahead and put out a, quote and nothing else, will you push back? How can you push back? My recommendation to marketers who reach out to me to ask this very question is that money talks. Show them my 7 risks. If anything, show them number 7, that you are introducing your brand to unnecessary risk by the risk of being called out, the risk of threatening your employer brand, the risk of being seen as hypocritical. And also remember that pressure from businesses comes from activists, it comes from consumers, it comes from journalists, and it comes from within. So whatever role you play in that world, leverage that power. Each of these inputs has power on what a business does and how it operates. So that's how we'll make change together. I'm going to close with a shameless plug for my forthcoming book and documentary. This is a weird world of, femvertising, greenwashing, pandering to the pandemic, now rainbow washing and Black Lives Matter. And my take on it is that if this is truly the new normal of what marketing is, then we need new rules of engagement. And I want to write them together. So if you don't want to ask a question here, reach out to me privately. I want to hear your point of view. And I want to hear how this has changed your thinking. I hear from a lot of marketers who say, you know what, you've made me think twice about insert social movement here and how I respond to it. And that means the world to me. So I also have a newsletter at my website that I will send you articles that I'm constantly learning as we navigate this, or you can find me on Twitter. So I think we've got a few minutes for questions, and thank you so much for letting me give you my perspective on this critical issue.
Katie, thank you so much. Yes, if anyone has a question, just go ahead and use that Q&A box. We'll also keep an eye out in chat just in case. So we have a lot of enthusiasm in all communications channels today. But I have one for you in the meantime. So right now, a number of companies are boycotting Facebook for not taking an active stance, right? And some of those companies are boycotting just for the month. Like, so, like, what does that mean? I mean, if you're boycotting because you want Facebook to take action, shouldn't it be until Facebook takes action, not like in some time frame?
Welcome to the world of corporate, activism. Is really not, their hands are tied, right? Because each of those companies, which were most of the outdoor, recreation companies, REI, Patagonia, they're all tied by sales goals. They know that they have to get right back out there and get back to business. And so I think marketers are not activists, but I think they can leverage the tools of marketing to create change. Marketers don't have the kind of carte blanche ability to go and do anything they want. So I would imagine that decision came from the best that they could do. They could get sign off on the month of July. And you know what? It's better than nothing. But I agree with you. You're like, does this really help? Facebook is going to laugh. Facebook is making so much money from ads that they're going to look at that and say, okay, so our ad revenue goes down minutely in July. And then it goes right back up in August as everyone forgets about this. They're counting on the news cycle to move on to the election or something else. And I think that's just the reality. This is why the call for the movement is truly about sustainable long-term, goals. That to me rings like a stunt, a very effective stunt, as I and you and everyone here heard about it in the news. But yes, definitely a stunt. I do think some companies will pull permanently. And I think those companies should be applauded, and hopefully it works. But you can't take down Facebook with a month of pulling ads.
Exactly. So it was interesting earlier when you showed the slide that had how employees feel versus how CEOs view the situation internally in the companies with Black representation. Yeah, that one. It reminds me of a study from a year or two ago that the numbers were something like 80% of CEOs think that they deliver a great customer experience, and only 20% of their customers actually feel the same way. It seems like there's a real communication gap where the C-suite really needs to start talking to their employees.
I agree, and talking to customers. I think that this pandemic has really shown how many companies don't have the internal muscle to go and find out what buyers need from them. I mean, don't forget, 4 months ago, our question was, how do we react to the pandemic? And the companies that, shone versus the ones that kind of flopped, regardless of industry, travel, I mean, there's nothing they can do. But the ones that did well were the ones that had the mechanisms in place to pause and be agile and go to customers and say, we don't know what we're doing. We've never had this before. What do you need from us? And I think that's the kind of cultural, difference between companies that are always going to operate with a very product-centric, insular point of view, and those that understand they have to constantly be in contact with customer communities, employee communities, again, stakeholders, to figure out how they maintain relevance. It's not like a one-time persona project anymore. This is now an ongoing discipline of how close you can get to feedback, how you can analyze data that's coming in, how you can just, even if you're a small business, how often you're conducting these kinds of conversations to find out, am I delivering what I'm saying I'm delivering? And I think those companies that do, clearly, are the ones that know how to react and make changes quickly. The rest are kind of just figuring it out, unfortunately.
Yeah. So great question from Evie. Do you think this increased awareness will spill over to sustainability and corporate social responsibility in general? And I'll add to that all of the other topics that you mentioned.
Absolutely. This is why I am like both delighted and horrified that I've decided to write a book about this topic right now. It's an era where it doesn't matter the social movement. Like I said, companies are hungry for ways to maintain relevance. The Business Roundtable, the group of CEOs who last summer pledged to move to a stakeholder capitalist model, they were ones that said, we know, it was largely investor driven. It basically was a movement of companies and investors in the community saying, we know that long-term profits come from brands that do well by doing good. And I believe, it has happened so fast. I'm telling you, I started writing about femvertising in like late 2016. 2020 has been this like rush. It has just gone crazy in terms of how many brands now adopt sustainability, cause-aligned marketing, corporate social responsibility. You name the nomenclature is kind of all over the map. They're now seeing it as an integral part of business. And consumers, a lot of people like to say Gen Z, but truly, even us millennials, we are also looking at the power of voting with our wallet. I mean, you have to look at the impact of social media. You have to be clear about the fact that news is driven now by social media and what's being called out, what's being canceled, it is no longer in the hands of a few advertisers or a few media outlets. It has been distributed. And what that means is it allows for the mechanisms of true social change and consumers and invested conscious consumers to be the ones that are in control. That is just the truth. It's also a really awesome place to be because it means, Ginger, to your point earlier, the companies that are able to tap into that hungry energy from consumers, they're the ones that are going to be able to react and give them what they want. That's what it's about. I was reading a newsletter from, I forget the woman's name, but she runs a newsletter about music fandom. And, music stars have stans. They don't have fans, it's stans. These like, absolutely devoted fans. That's the new kind of model for bringing anything to market. You need stans. You need people that are so aligned with you value-wise that they're going to be loyal with you for the long haul. And that is the new dynamic at play. So to answer your question, yes. and thank God, because it's a wild time to be marketing, and I think it's a better model for more relevant companies.
Absolutely. And so, quick question from Joe. Going back to Facebook, any
Yes.
comment on Facebook's employees' revolt against Mr. Z, as he puts it?
He who shall not be named. It reminds me of the Wayfair walkouts that happened here in Boston a couple years ago, where Wayfair was found to be supplying beds to the border detention facilities. It reminds me of I believe it was Amazon or Google, the walkouts of those employees for the creation of facial recognition software that was they found dangerous. It reminds me of all the different employee activists that one study, and I don't remember the source, found that 1 in 4 employees considers themselves to be an activist. And that is, again, consumers have a voice, journalists, of course, have a lot of pressure, employees, you have a lot of power in terms of how you direct the company that you work for. One book I'll recommend is Mark Benioff's Trailblazer, where he speaks about the role that employees have in holding leadership accountable to essentially doing what they say they're going to do, but operating in alignment with values. I don't know, to answer your question, I don't know if anything is going to change Facebook's MO. I think money is the only thing that's going to actually shift what they do. They're just so big, right? That it really, like a small walkout of a few dozen employees, doesn't really matter. You know, you had a pretty high profile engineer leave but again, I don't think it's going to cause this massive change. If a bunch of advertisers suddenly decided to stop using Facebook, I would be shocked. The ROI from Facebook ads are so high that they are beholden to Facebook to continue to grow their business. Again, it comes down to what a marketer really can do, what room they have to be an activist, and keeping their job.
Absolutely. Well, Katie, thank you so much for all the insight. Really, really informative. Appreciate you being here today.
Thanks for having me. And I'm going to give one more final plug. I'm selling these t-shirts, Don't Pander at My Parade, for the month of Pride Month. And I know Ginger's going to send out a link. All the money will go to funding this self-directed documentary and book. So thank you in advance for purchasing my tote bags and t-shirts, and fanny packs are coming next.
Oh, nice.
No, but thank you, Ginger. This is a critical topic. So thanks for the platform. I appreciate it.
Definitely. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I hope that I will see you all on July 8th for our next midweek recharge, where we're going to talk about AI, marketing leadership, and the quantification of everything. Because we know that you all love data when you're in marketing. So join data science evangelist Zena Urginski, who's the CEO of Genre X Consulting, and the well-known Ken Kreitzer, who you all know and love, who is going to co-host the Q&A on what marketing leaders and other executives, especially those in the C-suite, need to do to lead in the age of AI. So be sure to register for that. Katie, thank you again. Thanks everyone for being here. See you soon.
Thank you all. Take care.